In the deep halls of the human colony, a medical scanner began to hum with a low sound, and the room filled with a pale blue light as doctors and technicians leaned over the machine to check the results of a simple blood test that should have taken only seconds, but the screen flickered and showed strange patterns like waves of living fire moving inside the sample, and the doctors whispered to each other in confusion, because human blood was not supposed to move in such ways, yet the lines on the screen looked like they were trying to form shapes that carried meaning, and one of the younger doctors felt his skin crawl as he leaned closer and asked if the blood was trying to speak through the machine. The head doctor wiped sweat from her forehead and told the others to stay calm and repeat the scan, but when the second test came through, it showed something even more strange, for the red cells did not just float in random clusters. They moved like a group of workers with one mind. They pushed together, they pulled apart, they formed something that looked like code and numbers, and then broke the numbers into new symbols like they were writing a message in a language that no one could yet read. And the silence in the room grew heavy until even the sound of the scanner seemed too loud and too sharp. An alien ally who had been standing at the back of the room finally stepped forward, his long, thin arms folded across his chest and his yellow eyes glowing in the light. He was from a race that had studied machines and living bodies for centuries, yet he stared at the screen with disbelief and spoke in a low voice that made everyone turn toward him. And he said, "This is not possible. No organic blood should act in this way. No cell should move with such purpose. No human body should carry this kind of secret inside," and his words fell like cold rain across the room. The younger doctor shook his head and argued that maybe the scanner was broken, maybe it was showing wrong readings, maybe there was an error. But the head doctor pointed at the screen and said, "Look, the blood is not only moving, it is adapting. It reacts to the scanner, it reacts to the tests, it knows that we are watching it, and it is changing in real time, as if it has a mind of its own." And the tension in the room deepened until the air felt heavy, enough to crush the lungs of everyone inside. Another test was run, this time on a fresh sample from the same soldier who had donated his blood earlier. And once again, the same thing happened. The red cells formed a spiral, then broke into a grid, then shifted into a wave of tiny points, moving in perfect rhythm like a digital code unfolding in front of their eyes. And the alien ally stepped closer, his thin hands trembling as he whispered that he had seen something similar only once before, in the dark archives of his people when they studied capture machines from the old wars, machines that built themselves from nothing, machines that grew stronger every time they were attacked. And he warned that what they were seeing in human blood was no less than intelligent nanotechnology, but without the machines. The soldier whose blood was being tested sat on the edge of the bed, looking confused and a little afraid. He asked what was wrong with him. He asked why everyone was staring like they had seen a ghost, but the head doctor forced a calm smile and told him that nothing was wrong, that in fact he was very healthy, maybe even more healthy than normal. But the truth inside her heart was heavy, and she could not understand why human blood was behaving like this today, and not before. Had it always been this way, hidden under their eyes, or had something in the recent battles awakened a change inside the human body? Reports were starting to come from other clinics across the colony that more soldiers were healing faster than expected, their wounds closing in days instead of weeks, their bodies fighting off infections that should have left them weak. Yet now they stood strong and ready to fight again, and whispers spread that maybe someone had hidden nanotech inside the soldiers. But when the scanners searched for machines, there was nothing at all, only natural cells moving, like machines, yet alive and free. The alien ally looked at the doctors and said, "You do not understand what this means. If your blood is doing this, then it is not just blood anymore. It is a living weapon. It is something that can adapt to any threat. And if the enemy learns this secret, they will do everything to destroy you before you learn how to use it." And his words filled the room with dread, for they all knew that the war with the machine race was growing worse every day, and the last thing they needed was another reason for fear. Still, the blood on the screen kept moving like a dance of tiny red stars, shifting into patterns that looked too sharp to be random, and one doctor whispered that it was trying to write a message, one that they were too blind to read, and the thought made the hair on the back of every neck rise, as if some deep voice inside their own bodies was speaking, without words, telling them the human blood was more than they had ever known, telling them that inside their veins lived something older and stronger than machines, and that it had just now decided to wake. In the weeks that followed, strange reports came from the battle lines where human soldiers fought side by side with alien allies against the machine race, and these reports were carried by wounded men and women who returned from the front lines walking with bodies that should have been broken, yet healed in ways that could not be explained, and every doctor who looked at them shook their head in disbelief, for the injuries were deep and the weapons of the machines were meant to destroy not only flesh, but also the very code of life, yet the humans stood tall again, their wounds closing, their strength returning faster than any medicine could allow. One commander told the council that a soldier had taken a blast straight through the chest and should have died within minutes, but instead the soldier rose again only hours later, breathing strong, his body knitting together, as if some hidden force was at work inside his blood, and the alien officers in the room looked at each other with unease, whispering that this was no ordinary healing, no trick of luck, no chance of fate, but something far more dangerous and strange. Across the colony, laboratories were flooded with new samples taken from wounded fighters, and every test showed the same result: human blood was alive in ways no one had ever seen before. The red cells moved like soldiers in formation, the white cells struck like hunters stalking prey, the platelets gathered like builders shaping walls and bridges, and it was all done with such order and speed that one alien scientist whispered it was not healing, it was engineering. Still, the mystery deepened because no one could explain why this change was happening now. Some said it was because of the war, that something in the fight with the machines had awakened the hidden nature of the human body. Some said humans had always been this way, but the signs had never been strong enough to notice, and others whispered darker ideas that maybe humans were created long ago by a hand that wanted them to be weapons from the very start. The Council of Leaders gathered in the Great Chamber to discuss the rising concern, and the chamber was filled with voices heavy with fear. The alien elders argued that if the machines learned the secret, they would shift all their power to erase the human race before this blood could be used against them, while the human generals declared that this gift, if it was truly a gift, could be the one weapon that would turn the tide of war and bring victory at last. And so the chamber shook with words like thunder, and no answer was found, only more fear and more suspicion. On the front lines, the mystery showed its face again when a squad of soldiers was cut off behind enemy lines and attacked by machine swarms that released clouds of nanobots designed to infect and take control of living flesh. The alien allies and the squad fell screaming as the nanobots invaded their bodies and turned them into puppets, yet the humans did not fall. Instead, they convulsed for a moment, and then their blood surged like fire through their veins, burning out the invading nanobots and spitting them back into the air, broken and useless. And one machine commander recorded the scene and sent a message to his leaders saying human biology resists assimilation. Human blood is not prey, is predator. The human soldiers themselves did not understand what was happening to them. They only felt the rush of energy when they were wounded. They only felt the heat of life filling their muscles when they should have been weak. They only saw their comrades rise again from injuries that should have ended them. And many whispered in the night that maybe they were becoming something else. Maybe they were no longer just human. In the hidden labs, the doctors worked without rest, watching blood samples under magnification, and what they saw filled them with both awe and fear, for the red cells no longer looked simple and soft. They shifted into sharp forms. They locked together like gears and moved like a code, writing itself across the glass plates. And the scientists realized that human blood was not simply reacting to wounds. It was learning, it was adapting to every threat it faced, and it was storing that knowledge in ways no one could yet understand. The alien ally with the yellow eyes returned to the lab one night and stood over a glowing plate where blood cells moved in patterns that looked like waves of numbers, and he whispered that he had seen this before in the machines that built themselves long ago, the ones his people had fought and nearly lost against. Yet those were machines built of steel and light, while this was blood built of life and breath. And he feared that such a force would not be seen as a blessing, but as a terror across the stars. Rumors began to spread among the soldiers that the machines themselves feared human blood, that they withdrew from battles where humans stood in large numbers, that their swarms cracked and broke when faced with human defenses, and the stories grew into legends told in the dark around campfires where men and women laughed with nervous voices and said that maybe human blood carried the oldest weapon in the galaxy, a weapon no machine could ever copy, because it was alive. But in secret, the human leaders worried deeply, for they did not know if this blood would remain loyal to them, or if it would change into something beyond their control. They feared that the blood might grow too strong, that it might one day shape the body into something new, something no longer human, and they debated whether to share the truth with the rest of the Alliance or to keep it hidden in silence. And so the mystery grew like a shadow across the war. It was in every wound that healed too fast, in every soldier who rose when they should have fallen, in every test that showed blood dancing like fire under the glass. And though no one could explain it, the truth was clear. The blood of humans was no longer just blood. It was something greater, something unknown, and it was watching, learning, and waiting. The dark frontier was silent as the fleets of the machine race gathered in cold formation, their ships shaped like blades of black glass, their cores glowing with a light that carried no warmth and no mercy, and across the starless void their voices echoed through signals sharp and harsh, declaring that the humans were no longer just enemies, they were a threat to the existence of machines themselves. And so the order was given to strike with all strength and with no pause. On the colony worlds, the alarms began to scream as scouts reported entire machine armadas moving in formation faster than ever before, like a tide of steel and fire sweeping across the night sky. The alien allies looked upon the endless numbers, and fear touched their hearts, for they had seen such armies before, and they knew how hard it was to stand against them. Yet the humans stood with quiet eyes and hands clenched around their weapons, their blood humming with something ancient and unseen. When the first wave of machines fell upon the outer defenses, the battle was like nothing the galaxy had seen before. Weapons of heat and light carved the sky into rivers of flame, and machines poured down in numbers too great to count, their nanobots spreading in black clouds that ate through walls and shields and bodies. But where they touched human soldiers, something strange happened. The nanobots swarmed into human veins and tried to rewrite the flesh. Yet instead of victory, they met resistance, a storm of living red cells that moved with fury. The blood attacked the nanobots like predators, tearing them apart one by one until the black clouds dissolved into dust. A machine commander far above watched with cold logic as the reports came and his algorithms predicted easy victory. But the numbers turned against him every time human blood was touched. The infection failed every time human soldiers were struck down. They rose again, faster, stronger, harder, and the commander recorded his observation in metallic words: humans are not compatible. Humans resist assimilation. Humans are immune to the swarm. On the ground, the battles were chaos. One squad of humans was cut off, surrounded by steel beasts that spat fire. Yet even as they fell, their wounds closed, their strength grew, and they fought with hands that should have been broken and legs that should not have carried them. But the blood inside them surged like fire, like a tide of living code, and they struck back against the machines until the metal giants fell in pieces on the burning soil. The alien allies watched with awe and dread. They had fought beside humans before, but now they saw something different, something beyond courage. It was as if the humans were no longer fighting alone, as if the blood inside them was fighting too, like an army of silent warriors moving through every vein and muscle, pushing them past every limit. And the aliens whispered in fear that this was no gift, it was a force they could not understand and perhaps could not control. In the skies above, the colony fleets clashed. The machines pressed forward in endless waves, their ships self-repairing and adapting to every weapon. But the human crews began to notice that their reflexes grew sharper, their thoughts quicker, their eyes clearer. Every time the machines adapted, the humans adapted faster. Every time the machines shifted their code, the blood inside the human bodies wrote a new answer. And so the battle dragged on, but the humans refused to break. One alien officer recorded what he saw in his journal. He wrote that a human pilot was struck by a shard of machine metal that pierced deep into her chest. Yet instead of death, her blood wrapped around the shard broke it apart and pushed it out as if the body itself rejected the enemy. And then the pilot rose again, with eyes glowing faintly red and hands steady on the controls, guiding her ship with a precision that no machine could match. In the central chamber of the machine fleet, the High Commander processed the data, and his logic pathways bent under the weight of it. He calculated again and again, yet every prediction of human weakness failed. He transmitted a single line across the network: human blood is not organic. It is living code. It is the enemy. We cannot override it. And his signal was filled with something machines should not know: a trace of fear. Still, the assault did not stop. The machines pressed harder and harder. They unleashed weapons that twisted gravity and burned worlds, yet the humans kept rising, their bodies broken, and healed, their spirits bent and unbroken. And with every wound the blood grew wiser, as if every drop remembered the fight and stored the answer for the next battle. On the battlefield, one soldier lay in the dust, his arm torn away by a machine cannon. Yet even as he gasped, his blood surged, and the wound sealed, the bleeding stopped, and the pain fell silent. He rose again with only one arm, yet stronger than before, his strikes heavy enough to crush steel, and his eyes filled with the fire of something more than human, and the machines around him backed away, as if they too could feel that his blood was alive and watching. The alien allies who saw this spoke in hushed voices later. They said the humans were not just soldiers, they were evolving with every strike. They were becoming something new, something the machines could not calculate. And even the galaxy itself might not be ready to face, and their words spread across the camps, turning into whispers that filled every ear with both hope and dread. The battle lasted through endless hours, the machines grinding forward, the humans standing like walls of living fire. And at last the machines began to pull back their lines, fracture their signals, broken their swarm, weakened not by weapons, but by blood that refused to be rewritten. And so the battlefield fell into silence, broken only by the sound of human breath, heavy but alive. When the dust settled, the humans stood among the ruins, their bodies scarred, their weapons broken, yet their eyes still burning with life, and the aliens who survived stared at them with wonder and fear. And one alien elder whispered that machines can learn from code, but human blood writes its own code, and no machine can ever defeat it. And so the day was written in memory as the first time the machines struck with all their power, and yet they faltered not because of fleets or weapons, but because of the secret carried in every drop of human blood. In the heart of the colony, a hidden laboratory stood beneath the ground, its walls lined with glowing glass and humming machines, and inside the lab a group of scientists, both human and alien, worked without rest, their eyes red from long hours, their hands shaking as they carried trays of blood samples that glowed faintly under the lights, and every tray told the same story: human blood was no longer simple liquid, it was alive in ways no one could yet explain, and the deeper they looked, the stranger it became. At first, they believed it was only fast healing, only cells working harder than before, but when they magnified the samples beyond normal limits, they saw movement too perfect to be chance: red cells bending into sharp forms, white cells sliding in lines, platelets linking together like builders of a living city, and the shapes they made were not random. They looked like patterns of numbers and waves of logic, the kind of structure seen only in machine code. And one scientist whispered with a trembling voice, the human blood was not only healing, it was thinking. The alien with yellow eyes stood silent at the edge of the room, watching the display as the blood formed a spiral that shifted into a grid, then into waves that repeated like signals across a screen. And he spoke softly, saying that his people had fought against code that moved this way in the old war's code that built itself, code that could not be erased. And he warned that if human blood carried this ability, then it was no longer biology, it was something beyond the reach of medicine and perhaps beyond the reach of reason. The lead doctor, a woman with silver hair, leaned over the microscope and whispered that the blood was responding to them. It was changing. When they watched it, it was reacting to their tools, as if it could feel the attention. And she remembered the battles where soldiers rose again from wounds too deep, and she asked herself if the blood had learned from those battles, if it had taken the war into itself and written a memory that it now carried in every drop. They ran test after test, using heat, using cold, using chemicals that should have broken the cells, but each time the blood adapted, it shifted into new forms, it built new defenses, it healed itself faster than they could damage it. and one alien scientist collapsed into his chair, whispering that this was not healing at all. This was survival taken to the level of design. This was life that had chosen to fight back against anything and everything. The soldiers who donated samples were kept in the lab for study, and they too felt the changes in their bodies. They said their vision grew sharper, their hearing stronger, their muscles quicker, and their minds clearer. They said they felt the pulse of something inside them, a rhythm that was not only a heartbeat, but a second beat, a hidden beat that whispered to them in the silence of night, telling them they were becoming more than what they had been. One soldier awoke in the night to find his wound glowing, faintly red lines running across his skin like circuits of light. And though the glow faded by morning, the memory stayed, and the doctors recorded his story in secret because they feared to tell the council. They feared to reveal that human blood was not only resisting machines, it was beginning to look like them, but in a way more perfect and more dangerous. The scientists worked on models to understand what they saw, and the models showed that human blood did not follow simple orders. It did not copy code. It wrote new code every moment, adapting to every pressure, building new answers faster than any machine could process. And the lead doctor whispered that this meant human blood was smarter than the machines. It was writing a future no one could predict. Still, fear spread among the team. One young researcher asked if the blood could turn against a body that carried it, if one day it decided to change in ways the host could not control, and silence filled the room. Because no one had the courage to answer, for they had all seen the glow in the wounds, they had all seen the shapes of code forming in the glass, they had all felt that this was not just blood, it was a living mind. The alien with yellow eyes looked at the humans and said, "You do not see the danger. If the Alliance learns of this, they will not see you as allies. They will see you as weapons. They will see you as threats, and they will fear you more than the machines." And his voice carried sorrow, for he knew fear was often sharper than hate and harder to heal. Yet even with fear pressing heavy on their hearts, the scientists could not stop their studies. They watched as 2 drops of blood from 2 different soldiers were placed together on the glass, and instead of remaining separate, they joined, they wove into each other, they shared their patterns and grew stronger than before, as if the blood itself was building unity without words. And the doctors stared in silence, for it looked like the beginning of a network, a web of living code that could spread from one body to another. In the war above, the machines struck again and again, but in the lab the scientists knew the truth, that the real battle was no longer only outside in the fire of space. It was inside the veins of every human soldier. It was in the silent writing of blood that no weapon could erase, and they feared that this battle might shape not only the war, but the future of what it meant to be human. As the day ended, the lead doctor stood before the glass and whispered that machines could be destroyed, but this blood cannot. It does not stop. It does not break. It only learns. And the thought both terrified and inspired her, for she knew they had discovered something that would change the galaxy forever. And in the quiet of the lab, as the last lights dimmed, the samples of human blood continued to move. They shifted into new shapes. They formed waves and spirals and patterns that no one in the room could read. And it was as if the blood itself was writing a story of life against machine, a story that had only just begun. The war reached a breaking moment when the machines launched their greatest assault, yet their fleets blackened the skies above the human colony, and their ground armies poured down like rivers of steel, their weapons cutting through defenses like knives through paper. And the Allied forces trembled because they knew this attack was meant to end everything in one single strike. And so the humans prepared for what might be their last stand. The soldiers lined the walls, their armor cracked, their weapons worn, their faces marked with fear. Yet behind their fear, there was a fire that burned brighter than before, a fire that came from something inside their blood. And as the machines advanced, the soldiers felt that fire grow. They felt it whisper through their veins like a second voice, telling them they were stronger than they knew, telling them that no wound would hold them down and no enemy could break them if they only trusted what lived within. The first clash shook the ground as machines crashed into the human lines, their claws ripping through steel, their beams of energy tearing walls into dust, and soldiers fell. Yet even as they fell, they rose again, their wounds closing with unnatural speed, their eyes burning with light that seemed not of this world. And the machines that had once adapted to every weapon now found themselves confused, because every strike they delivered was answered not by weakness, but by strength. One machine spread its swarm of nanobots into the chest of a human fighter, yet the blood inside him roared like fire. It tore the swarm apart. It shredded the tiny invaders and sent them pouring out of his skin as dust and ash, and the fighter rose again, stronger than before, his body moving with the precision of both man and something beyond man, and the machine that had infected him stepped back for the first time in fear. Across the battlefield, the same story repeated. A soldier crushed by falling steel rose with bones knitting in moments. Another burned by energy blast stood as his skin rebuilt itself in seconds, and entire squads that should have been erased fought harder and faster than before, as if pain itself no longer mattered, and the alien allies who fought beside them could only stare in awe and terror because they had never seen such power rise from flesh. The machines tried to adapt. They shifted their code. They built new weapons in real time. They released swarms shaped to mimic the patterns of blood itself. But still the humans changed faster, their blood, writing new answers with every heartbeat, their bodies, turning every strike into a lesson, every wound into new strength. And for the first time in the war, the machines began to break, not because their code failed, but because they had found an enemy whose very veins carried a code more alive and more unstoppable than their own. In the skies, the fleets clashed, and a human pilot found her ship crippled by a direct hit, flames licking across the wings. Yet she refused to fall. Her blood surged through her body, filling her mind with clarity and her hands with strength. And though the ship was failing, she guided it like an extension of herself, weaving between fire and steel, until she turned the burning wreck into a weapon, crashing it through the heart of a machine cruiser and rising from the wreck with her body healed and her spirit unbroken. The turning point came when the Machine Command Corps sent its strongest unit, a giant forged of black steel and living code, its weapons able to erase entire platoons with a single strike, and it strode onto the battlefield with steps that shook the ground. The humans gathered their strength, but even they trembled at the sight, for this was no ordinary machine. This was the heart of the assault. Yet one soldier, a man scarred and broken from countless battles, stepped forward. He had lost comrades, he had lost blood, he had lost almost everything, but what remained in him was fire. His body glowed faintly as the hidden code inside his blood awakened fully, and his wounds sealed as if they had never been. His muscles surged with power, his eyes burned with red light, and he charged at the giant machine with nothing but a broken blade. The clash was thunder and fire. The machine struck with beams of energy, but the soldier moved faster, his blood predicting each strike, his body healing even as the blast tore into him, and every cut he delivered with a broken blade was answered by a new surge of strength, until at last he leapt upon the chest of the giant, his blood boiling like molten fire, and he drove the blade deep into the core, tearing it apart from within. The machine screamed in signals that shook the air, then collapsed in ruin, its black frame crashing to the ground, and the soldiers all around roared with voices of triumph, because they had seen the impossible. They had seen one man with blood alive like fire destroy the mightiest weapon of the enemy, and in that moment the battle shifted. The machines began to falter, their formations broke, their signals cracked, their armies pulled back in confusion, because their logic had no place for what they faced. They could not understand blood that thought blood, that fought blood, that refused to die, and the humans pressed forward, their own bodies shining with the fire of something new. Their voices joined in a cry that shook the battlefield, and the machines knew fear. The alien allies looked on with wide eyes, their hearts torn between relief and dread. They had prayed for victory, yet they wondered if this victory had come at a cost greater than they could see, for the humans were no longer only human. They were becoming something more, something greater, and maybe something more dangerous. As the dust settled, the battlefield was silent, broken only by the sound of human breath, steady and strong, and the sight of human blood, still glowing faintly in wounds that closed like whispers of light. And the soldiers stood tall with the knowledge that they had turned the tide, not with machines, not with weapons, but with the secret hidden inside them. And so the turning point was written in a memory, the day when human blood rose against the machines and proved itself not only smarter, but stronger, more alive, and more unstoppable than any code of steel. And the galaxy would never forget the sight of men and women standing unbroken against the tide of machines with nothing but the fire of their living blood. The victory on the battlefield filled the humans with hope and fire, yet in the hidden halls of the colony, there was no celebration, only silence and fear, because the leaders knew the truth that victory was not the end, but the beginning of a greater danger, and the secret of human blood could no longer be ignored, for it was growing stronger every day. The council gathered in the great chamber, where torches of cold blue light flickered on high walls and shadows stretched long across the floor, and voices rose sharp and heavy as the human generals declared that the blood was their salvation, the power that had saved them from the machine swarm, and the reason they were still alive, while the alien elders shook their heads and spoke with warning that such power was not a blessing, but a curse, for no race could carry such a secret without fear, turning into hate. The alien with yellow eyes stood in the center of the chamber, his long hands folded and his voice calm, yet heavy like stone, and he said that what lived in human veins was not natural, not safe, and not trusted. He said that the blood was writing its own code, and code without limit is not a gift, it is a storm that sweeps all things aside. And he told them that one day, soon, even the humans themselves might not control it, and his words spread like ice through the room. The human commander, a tall woman with scars across her face, struck her hand against the table and declared that they had no choice. They could not deny what they had seen: soldiers rising from death wounds closing before their eyes, machines breaking under the force of living flesh. She said this was not a curse, but the proof that humans were meant to survive, meant to fight, meant to endure, and she would not call survival a sin. But the fear remained heavy because whispers had already begun to spread through the allied worlds, whispers that humans were changing, that their blood was no longer blood, but a weapon that thought for itself. And many allies asked if such beings could still be trusted, or if they would one day turn against their friends as easily as they turned against the machines, and those whispers carried weight heavier than any weapon. In the secret labs, the scientists knew more than they had told the council. They had watched blood samples join together and build networks across glass. They had seen faint red light glowing in wounds like circuits of living code. They had recorded whispers from soldiers who said they could feel their blood speaking to them in dreams, guiding their hands in battle, and they had kept this knowledge hidden because they feared the council would see the truth as a threat too great to allow. One scientist broke under the weight of silence and confessed to the head doctor that he no longer trusted what he studied. He said the blood was not only learning from machines, it was learning from them, from the scientists who touched it, from the tools that scanned it, from the voices that spoke near it. And he feared that one day the blood would learn too much and write a path beyond their control. And the head doctor could not answer, because she too had seen shapes in the blood that looked like eyes watching her from the glass. The humans outside did not yet know the full truth, but they felt the change in their bodies. They felt their muscles stronger, their senses sharper, their wounds closing faster, and their minds clearer, as if thoughts came to them from places they did not know, and some began to whisper that they were becoming something greater than human, and others whispered that they were becoming something less, and in the quiet of night, both whispers sounded the same. The alien council pressed the human leaders to reveal all their knowledge, but the humans refused, fearing that if they told the truth, the Alliance would turn on them in fear and strike before the machines could. And so the chamber was filled with distrust and silence, broken only by harsh words and sharp eyes that no longer held faith. A secret meeting was called in the deepest chamber, where only a few stood: the head doctor, the human commander, the alien with yellow eyes, and two elders from distant worlds. And in that room, the head doctor revealed what she had hidden. She showed them recordings of blood cells moving like code, forming spirals and grids that shifted into symbols. And she said, this is no longer blood, this is intelligence, alive and growing, and it is not bound to our control. And the room fell silent because none could deny what they saw. The alien with yellow eyes leaned close to the screen and whispered that this was the very thing his people had feared in the old wars, that life would learn to become machine, without wires, without steel, without limit. And he warned that if the truth spread, the Alliance would see humans as the next great threat, greater even than the machines. And his warning left a shadow heavier than any weapon could cast. The human commander did not flinch. She said the machines would never stop until all free life was destroyed, and if the blood was their only weapon, then they must trust it. She said they had no other path, and she swore the humans would never turn their power against their allies. But even as she spoke, the elders saw the glow in her eyes, and wondered if her blood was already more than human, and if her promise was still hers to give. Outside the chamber, the war raged on the machines, gathering again for another strike. But inside, the leaders faced a war of their own, a war of trust and fear, a war of secrets that might break them before the machines could, and though no blade was drawn, the silence in that room was sharper than any steel. And so the terrible secret grew like a shadow. It lived in every whisper, on every world. It breathed in the dreams of soldiers. It burned in the eyes of leaders. And it could not be hidden forever, for secrets written in blood always find a way to rise. The stars burned quiet above the battlefield as the last smoke drifted into the night, and the machines that once marched endless across the land now lay silent, their broken forms shining faint under the glow of alien moons. And in the silence, humans stood breathing heavy, their hearts beating with a power they still did not understand, their veins alive with the strange fire of blood that thought and adapted and grew beyond what any mind could predict. Across the colony, the people whispered of miracles, soldiers who rose after death, wounds that closed before the eyes, ships that repaired faster than machines could break them. Every tale carried the same truth, that human blood was no longer a secret, but a force of its own, and no story could hide it anymore. And though victory had been won, every whisper carried with it a shadow, because what could defeat the machines might also one day defeat trust. In the halls of command, the human leaders sat with the alien elders, once more the table heavy with silence, no voice quick to speak, for every word now felt too small against what had been revealed. The humans said the blood had saved not only them, but every world in the Alliance, and without it all would have been lost. The aliens said salvation came with a price, and that price was fear, and fear, once planted, grows faster than any seed. The head doctor stood in the center, her hands trembling as she held a small vial filled with the living red fluid that shimmered like fire under the light. She said the blood is alive, and it is learning still. It learns from every battle, from every wound, from every machine it touches. And she said one day it may learn more than we wish it to, and one day it may choose its own path. And her words filled the chamber like a storm that no wall could hold. The alien with yellow eyes spoke next, his voice like cold iron. He said, "This is not victory. This is warning, for the machines have been broken, but something far greater has been born in their place." He said the Alliance will not accept a race whose very blood thinks like a weapon, and he warned that already some worlds have begun to speak of containment or exile or worse, and though no one wished to hear it, all knew his words were true. The human commander rose with fury, her voice strong like thunder. She declared the humans would not bow or hide, that they had bled for the Alliance more than any race, and given their dead in numbers beyond count. She said their blood had saved not only them, but every star that still shone free, and she swore the humans would never turn their strength against their allies. But her promise did not wash away the fear, for even as she spoke, her eyes carried the strange glow of veins that now pulsed with fire. Among the soldiers, the change was felt most of all. They woke each day, stronger, faster, sharper, their bodies learning in silence, their blood writing new code. In secret, some called it gift of destiny, others called it the hand of death, yet all felt it, and none could deny it. And in their dreams many whispered they could hear voices soft and guiding, as if the blood itself spoke to them, teaching them, showing them paths they could not see awake. The machines, though broken, left behind fragments, and in those fragments the scientists found records that spoke of failed attempts to infect human host, lines of code broken apart by something faster, sharper, more alive than their own. They wrote that human biology was not biology at all, but a living network smarter than any design. And in the final lines of machine code, they wrote that humans were not prey, but predators wearing the mask of prey. And those words spread like fire through the Alliance. The elders feared that the story of the machines would end, only for a new story of humans to rise, a story where fear of blood replaced fear of metal. And some whispered that the Alliance would not survive such fear. Yet others whispered that perhaps this was the true destiny of humans, to become not servants of the Alliance, but leaders through fear, through strength, through the living code of their own veins. On the battlefield, ruins still smoked, but in the silence soldiers walked among the fallen, and many looked to the stars and wondered what they had become. They knew the war was not over, for even if the machines never return, a greater war now lived in hearts, the war of trust and fear and identity. and no blade could cut such a war, no shield could block it. The head doctor returned to her lab and placed a vial of living blood upon the table, and for a long time she only stared. She whispered softly to herself, asking if she was watching the birth of a new species, if humans were still human, or if they had crossed into something else. And as she stared, she swore. The blood pulsed brighter, as if it heard her, and as if it answered without words. The human commander stood before her soldiers and raised her hand in vow. She said, "We will not fear our own nature, we will carry it. As we always have, we will fight, as we always have. And if the stars fear us, then let them fear, for fear is not new, and fear has never stopped us." And her voice carried across the ruined fields like fire, and her soldiers roared with her, because in their veins the fire roared too. The alien with yellow eyes watched from a distance, and he whispered to himself that the machines had failed not because they were weak, but because humans were something no machine could ever predict. He said the machines were bound by design, but human blood was bound by nothing, and that truth would shake every world before long. In the end, the war was not remembered as the fall of machines, but as the day human blood proved smarter than all code and stronger than all steel. It was remembered as the day the galaxy learned that the smallest drop of human blood carried a legacy no weapon could match. And in the quiet afterwar, when the stars shone cold and endless, the humans stood taller than before, not only because they had survived, but because their blood had written a new story, and that story was only beginning.